Hey, Fox Urgent, I'm Molly Line. Hostilities heighten in the Mideast, and now Israel's military orders Palestinians living in the northern Gaza Strip to evacuate, quote, for their own safety. That warning follows a series of Israeli airstrikes targeting Hamas in Gaza.
The burden of the word of the Lord for Israel, saith the Lord, which stretcheth forth the heavens and layeth the foundation of the earth and formeth the spirit of man within it. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it.
To U.S. efforts to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. NBC News senior White House correspondent Chris Jansing is with us now with the latest from there. Chris?
Good evening, Lester. Well, there's been a barrage of phone calls with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu from the president on Thursday, several more from Secretary of State John Kerry, including one today. A senior State Department official says Kerry again stressed, as the president did, that the U.S. wants to play a role in de-escalating the violence. And while repeatedly reaffirming that Israel has a right to defend itself, the White House is leading that international appeal for a ceasefire. Calls from France, Britain. There was a non-binding resolution last night from the United Nations. So what more specifically can the U.S. do? Diplomacy, as always in the Middle East, is complicated. Hamas is a recognized terrorist organization, so officials here do not talk directly to its leaders. But the administration has vowed to use its relationship in the region to try to broker that ceasefire. But of course, it's going to have to put a lot of pressure on both Hamas and Israel, Lester.
Chris, as we recall, 2012, Egypt stepped forward to help broker a ceasefire. What are the options in terms of other countries that might take that role this time around?
Yeah, they're not great, Lester. Egypt again. Former British Prime Minister Tony Blair has been acting as a special envoy on behalf of the U.S., the European Union, Russia, and the UN, meeting with Egypt's President al-Sisi this weekend. But Egypt isn't nearly as influential since former President Morsi was ousted in a coup and imprisoned. Turkey, another player last time, that relationship is also fractured. One more possibility may be Qatar. Hamas's political chief lives there. But in response to questions on Friday and today, the White House did not say the president would dispatch Secretary Kerry to the region this week. Lester?
Chris Jansing at the White House. Chris, thank you.
Britain's former Prime Minister Tony Blair was in Cairo over the weekend to discuss the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Blair is now a special Mideast envoy representing the EU, Russia, the UN, and the United States. He met Egypt's new president, Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, who warned of dire consequences if the situation escalates any further. Adel Al-Marouki has more.
After 2 days of talks in Israel, the quartet's Middle East envoy Tony Blair paid a quick visit to Egypt. In the capital, Cairo, Blair met President al-Sisi to discuss ways and means of putting an end to Israel's sustained week-long attacks on Gaza and the firing of rockets by Hamas into Israeli territories. Analysts say it shows the importance of Egypt's role in the crisis.
Tony Blair's visit confirms the importance of Egypt's role in this crisis. Egypt has strong ties with Hamas, regardless of its relation with the Muslim Brotherhood. Egypt has strong ties with the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. It also controls the Rafah Passage, which is now the only gate available for the Strip. This can be used as leverage over Hamas.
Spokesman for the Egyptian presidency stated that the meeting reviewed the latest events on the ground in the occupied territories. President al-Sisi explained Egypt's efforts to ease the crisis at the political and humanitarian levels. A statement from the Egyptian presidency said al-Sisi warned Blair that any further military escalation would result in the loss of more innocent civilian lives.
Blair is leading talks on a possible deal for truce. The deal includes Hamas demands for Israel to release 56 detainees from Gaza and its leaders from the recent intervention in the West Bank, along with starting to open the passages between Israel and Gaza. In return, Hamas stops Al-Qassam brigade attacks and widens the buffer zones, and freezing attack on the southern Israeli settlements.
During his visit, Blair also spoke to Sameh Shoukry, the Egyptian foreign minister, and other Egyptian officials. After a few hours in Cairo, Blair took off to Jerusalem to continue negotiations. Meanwhile, the Arab League has called for an urgent meeting for its foreign ministers in Cairo to discuss Gaza.
While all concerned parties are rushing to push a truce forward, Israel ordered all residents in North Gaza to evacuate to the south by Sunday, planning more airstrikes and possible boots on the ground for the first time in years. Adel Mahroui, CCTV, Cairo.
And there are growing fears Israel and Hamas are edging toward an all-out war. According to the Israeli military, more than 800 rockets have been fired from Gaza just in the past week. Nearly 150 of those have been intercepted by Israel's sophisticated defense system called the Iron Dome.
Keep not thou silence, O God. Hold not thy peace, and be not still. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people, and consulted against thy hidden one. They have said, Come, and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee. The tabernacles of Edom, and the Ishmaelites, of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gebo, and Ammon, and Amalek, the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. Asser also is joined with them. They hope in the children of Lot. Selah. Thus saith the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Gaza, and for 4 I will not turn away the punishment thereof, because they carried away captive the whole captivity, to deliver them up to Edom. But I will send a fire on the wall of Gaza, which shall devour the palaces thereof. And I will cut off the inhabitant from Ashdod, and him that holdeth the scepter from Ashkelon, and I will turn mine hand against Ekron, and the remnant of the Philistines shall perish, saith the Lord God. Seek ye the Lord, all ye meek of the earth, which have wrought his judgment. Seek righteousness, seek meekness. It may be ye shall be hid in the day of the Lord's anger. For Gaza shall be forsaken, and Ashkelon a desolation. They shall drive out Ashdod at the noonday, and Ekron shall be rooted up. Woe unto the inhabitants of the sea coast, the nation of the Kerethites. The word of the Lord is against you. O Canaan, the land of the Philistines, I will even destroy thee, that there shall be no inhabitant. And the sea coast shall be dwellings and cottages for shepherds, and folds for flocks. And the coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall be thereupon. In the houses of Ashkelon shall they lie down in the evening. The Lord their God shall visit them, and turn away their captivity.
Hi Lester, good evening. Well, Israel's saved again today by the Iron Dome. Hamas fired more than 100 rockets at Israel today. All either were no danger or they were shot down by the anti-rocket system. Only one teenager, he was hit by falling metal debris. He's seriously injured. Now, Hamas has fired altogether more than 900 rockets in the last week, and he's the first Israeli to be seriously hurt from the rockets. Now, the army still poised on the edge of Gaza, waiting for the order to invade. A senior army officer told the press today that Israel will, quote, strike with might from this evening. Now, it isn't clear if that means more attacks from the air and sea, or whether troops would go in on the ground, but clearly Northern Gaza is the target. And as Ayman mentioned earlier, a small unit did already go into Gaza, a small unit of Israeli soldiers. As far as we know, they're the first to go in. A commando unit from the Navy entered Gaza to destroy a rocket launching facility that the army says could not be hit from the air. 4 of those Israeli soldiers were lightly wounded, but they're all home now, and the army says they accomplished their mission. Prime Minister Netanyahu, he said today that Israel would not bow to pressure to call a ceasefire, not until Israel has achieved its goal of stopping all rocket fire from Gaza. He said the attack could go on for a long time. But you know, Lester, the more Palestinian dead there are, the more forced from their homes, the more international pressure is building on Israel to stop their assault.
There's been heavy artillery fire. I'm crouched down in the being blocked by the hotel wall here because it got very intense about 10 minutes ago. We heard small arms fire back and forth. We even had some tracers go over us. That's when we got down. We got everything inside. And now we've been seeing cannon fire coming from offshore, hitting certain locations. We've seen airstrikes. We've heard helicopter gunships. It's been a very intense fight. You know, the Israeli Defense Forces have warned people to evacuate their homes here in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. I'm looking northward here right now. They've warned people to evacuate their homes, get out of the area, because fighting was expected to intensify, and at this point, Molly, it certainly is. I'm just kind of watching. There's a lot of smoke. I smell the smoke. I smell the gunpowder. I'm still seeing tracers being fired. It looks like they're honing in on one particular target. Now, we're hearing, this is not confirmed, but that Israeli Special Forces are on the ground right now. They may be raiding a particular Hamas location. As I reported earlier, there have been numerous rocket launches in and around this area, including where we are right now. We've seen numerous airstrikes in the area, including one that hit probably 100 yards from the area, from this building. It was so close that it literally shook the building. That was earlier. Now there seemed to be kind of a lull. It was quiet. Bam, it just picked up, intensified. First the small arm fire, then some missile strikes, and then heavy cannon fire from offshore. We heard voices. We hear what sounds like boats kind of moving up and down the coast, and those voices possibly could have been those Special Forces units coming up from the south. That's why at one point, hold on, we had tracer fire going over our head. So I'm watching, I'm just kind of looking northward, maybe a quarter of a mile just in front of us, and that's where this location looks like it's being targeted. Things have quieted right now, but there are spurts. Again, it was heavy for about 10 minutes, it kind of calmed down, but then it keeps picking up, going back to intense fire. So right now we're safe. We're in our room. We pulled everything inside. I'm blocked by a wall right here, and we're just kind of staying low at this point. So things have definitely intensified. The feeling is that that will continue, and really the question at this point, and has remained the question all along, is will there be a heavy ground contingent moving in? Hold on. It doesn't appear that, more tracer, it doesn't appear that's the case, but again, we're hearing, it's not confirmed, I want to be very clear about that, but Israeli Special Forces may be on the ground right now targeting a specific Hamas location. What that could be, whether it's a military bunker, whether it's a rocket launch site, whether it's a command center, is unknown. We're still waiting for more details, we're waiting for confirmation, but at this point, the fighting has absolutely intensified. Hold on, bear with me. Okay, last night we started hearing artillery fire coming off the coast, presumably a naval warship, targeting, again, northbound. I don't know if you could see that. That was another, I don't know if that was, yeah, I'm not sure what that was. Okay, but last night we heard artillery fire from offshore, targeting, it seems, that area, again, a quarter mile north of us. There was artillery fire to the east as well. So the assumption was that somewhere in between, perhaps, there are strategic targets most likely Hamas targets. So over the last few days, we haven't heard any small arms fire. We've heard missile strikes, we've seen rocket launches from Gaza targeting Israel, and we've heard some artillery fire, cannon fire from offshore, and then on the Israeli border, troops there, 155 millimeter howitzer cannons, 105 millimeter tank cannons. But tonight, Molly, is the first that we've heard small arms fire on the ground, along with helicopter gunships. And again, we were so close to it that at one point, and we believe that ground forces were moving up from the south, that these tracers were going right over us.
Israeli soldiers have entered Gaza to take out several missile launch sites, ending in armed clashes with Hamas. There are now fears the move will spark a ground invasion into the enclave. Paula Slee has got more from Tel Aviv.
Israeli soldiers briefly entered northern Gaza. The IDF says that the purpose of the mission was to destroy rocket launching sites. We understand that there was a brief exchange of fire during which 4 Israeli soldiers were lightly wounded, but the army has since returned to Israel. Of course, the question being asked is whether or not this is a precursor for a ground offensive. Certainly the sense on the ground, and from me witnessing the amassing of tanks and armored personnel vehicles and troops along the border, it does seem as if a ground offensive could be imminent, and certainly the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has indicated that this is an option that he is considering. The word from the Israeli army, however, is that they are ready for a ground offensive, but that ultimately this is a political decision.
Well, for the first time since this conflict got underway, Israel is saying that its forces crossed the border into Gaza. Early this morning, under cover of darkness, a commando unit launched an attack in Gaza City, going after those rocket launchers. The military says that 4 Israeli soldiers were wounded. It all happened only hours after central Israel came under heavy rocket attack. Residents of Tel Aviv and the surrounding area much of Saturday night were racing to bomb shelters. Hamas issued a vague threat about an impending attack, and at 9:07, a barrage of rockets rained down on central Israel. Rockets threatening lives and property were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system. There were no injuries. Israel overnight continued airstrikes in Gaza. At least 21 people were killed during a strike at the home of the Hamas police chief. Many were reportedly leaving a nearby mosque. Israel is targeting militants' homes as part of its offensive against Hamas. In total, 120 homes have been bombed. So far, more than 150 people have been killed in Gaza, many of them civilians, including children. Israel accuses Hamas of using its own people as human shields. For the past day, Israel has been dropping leaflets over northern Gaza, warning residents there to evacuate their homes for what is described as, quoting now, a brief military operation. This is an area that is home to some 100,000 Palestinians. In the last few minutes, we have seen a number of airstrikes taking place in this area, but nowhere near the intensity that had been anticipated. So far today, there have been at least 60 rockets fired, one of them just outside a hotel in southern Israel that houses foreign journalists.
All right, moving now to the Middle East, where hundreds of Gaza residents are fleeing their homes. That's after Israel dropped leaflets in northern Gaza today, warning residents to move away from Hamas sites to avoid airstrikes. The U.S. Consulate General in Jerusalem helped 150 U.S. citizens leave Gaza and get into Jordan today. Israel says it's already hit what it calls more than 1,000 terror targets. Yet rockets from Gaza keep coming. The Gaza Health Ministry says at least 168 people have died in Gaza there, and most are civilians.
قبل ساعتين من الآن ب3 صواريخ نصبت طائرات الاستطلاع الصهيونية، يعني خطوة جريئة قامت بها المواطنون بالتجمهر أو الاعتلاء سطح هذا المنزل، يعني لمنع طائرات الاحتلال
أن يتعرض الناس وأن يواجهوا الطيران العسكري الإسرائيلي بصدور عارية ليحموا بيوتهم. أعتقد أن هذه سياسة أثبتت نجاعتها، ونحن في الحركة ندعو شعبنا إلى اعتماد هذه السياسة.
We're using missile defense to protect our civilians, and they're using their civilians to protect their missiles. This can be achieved through diplomatic or military means. Whatever military means, we'll do what is necessary. So I've spoken to President Obama and a good number of world leaders, and I think they all understand Israel's inherent right of self-defense.
Overhead, we can hear Israeli jet aircraft. There's also the regular boom of artillery being fired nearby. And today, for the first time, militants in Gaza fired their longest range rocket yet during this conflict, targeting the Israeli city of Nahariya. Now, Nahariya in the past has come under attack by Hezbollah in Lebanon, but this is the first time that it has been fired on by militants in Gaza. That means their rockets have a range of little over 100 miles. From one end of the country to the other, no Israeli is out of reach from Hamas. Also today, residents in the city of Tel Aviv ran for cover after hearing air raid sirens, and the city of Ashkelon, a 16-year-old was seriously injured by a rocket. Throughout the day, there were rocket attacks and sirens going off in dozens and dozens of Israeli cities. The Prime Minister warned Israelis not to become complacent. He said if they hear the sirens wailing, they should seek shelter. He said the Iron Dome is one thing, but you also need to have what he described as iron discipline. Israeli forces, meanwhile, remain in position along the border, waiting now for orders for a ground incursion if one should occur. And lastly, as the violence continues, today the Israeli military allowed a supply of emergency blood to cross the border into Gaza for civilian use. Just a few days ago, they allowed some 200 trucks to cross the border, carrying various supplies such as food and fuel. Israel is concerned about a possible humanitarian crisis, especially if there is some type of a ground invasion.
This close to the Gazan border, Kibbutz Nahal Oz is just 880 meters from the fence. The explosions rip through the evening air. The deep thud of an Israeli airstrike. The shorter crack of outgoing fire and the hiss as a missile streaks past us. We just heard a rocket go very, very close over our heads. These playgrounds aren't full of children anymore. They've all moved to a kibbutz in northern Israel, hoping it'll be safer there. Though just Friday morning, a rocket came into the north from Lebanon. The people here tell me, though, that it's not just the rockets they're scared of. They're scared of militants from Gaza tunneling in. Benny Seller runs the security at Nahal Oz. Now Operation Protective Edge is underway, he carries a gun. Like most Israelis, he has a dim view of Hamas.
Unfortunately, here the Hamas use the civilians. You know, they hide behind the civilians, the civil people. That's why kids die here. And here's a soldier in the front, and all the civilian in the shelters. And the other side, the civilian outside and the Hamas inside the shelters.
It turns out what we'd heard was an anti-tank missile. It had hit a military jeep near the base next door, injuring 2 soldiers. Israeli tanks fired back, but the rockets from Gaza keep coming. So you can hear another one of the red alerts. There was a mortar that came over yesterday and hit that building here in Nahal Oz. This is the moment where you're meant to look for the nearest shelter and get inside it. And each house has its own shelter.
Well, this is our own shelter, but it's not a bomb.
Siobhan Rachamim says she'll spend the night in her safe room. Her husband and daughter all tucked up there together. They're sorry it's come to this.
We used to have a good relationship with them. I mean, we had friends in Gaza who were even at my wedding. And we used to go into Gaza on Saturdays and go and eat hummus and sit there at the beach.
Most of the people there want peace, want to.
But now the call from the leadership on both sides seems more like a battle cry, even as the people pray for their lives to go back to normal.
Ambassador, as we've been reporting, Israel sent in that small group of commandos who infiltrated northern Gaza to take out some of those rocket launchers. Do you think this potentially could then lead to a full-scale invasion of Gaza?
Well, I don't think it's a full-scale invasion in the sense of tens of thousands of troops going in for a limited period of time and coming out. My guess is it will be more like a long series of incursions to go after specific targets. There's no doubt that Israel is militarily superior here, but the question is whether they can find and destroy Hamas's extensive arsenal of missiles of various ranges and capabilities, the launching equipment that they need, the command and control and communications infrastructure at the top Hamas leadership. It's not just in one place. All of these things are in multiple places, and to make it even more difficult, they're moving around all the time. So I think Israel has learned from prior incursions that you can't go in once and act like the job can be done that way. I don't anticipate it that way this time.
Well, Ambassador, it's estimated that Hamas has about 20,000 of these rockets, and that Israel this time has taken out about 20% of those. And this is the third time that they've had this conflict with Hamas since it took over Gaza in 2007. What do you think will finally end it?
Well, I think that shows pretty clearly why this kind of effort to go in and sort of neutralize Hamas's capabilities ultimately just helps perpetuate the cycle of violence that people like to talk about all the time. I think Israel would be fully entitled here, not just to respond to these rocket attacks, not just to try and find and destroy some of the rockets in their launchers, but to destroy Hamas. That's what the problem is. This terrorist group is determined to eliminate Israel. That's its objective. And when you consider Hezbollah operating out of Lebanon in the north with the same objective, it's very hard to see why Israel has been as restrained as it has been, other than U.S. and European pressure.
Oh, is that even a reality to potentially, as you say, destroy Hamas? Look, Iran apparently is backing it. Tehran's sending those Fajar 5 missiles that can now hit Tel Aviv. What is Iran's goal? And how do you dismantle Hamas when they've got the backing of the mullahs in Tehran?
Well, I think Israel could certainly do it, but I think it's constantly worried that if it really does undertake an operation it, in my mind, is perfectly entitled to do in the exercise of its inherent right of self-defense, that the rest of Europe and the United States will put pressure on them and they will lose their allies. In fact, what Israel is faced with is a never-ending series of pressures which actually mounts every day that goes by as Iran gets closer to nuclear weapons. And let's be clear, I think a lot of the equipment, a lot of the missiles in particular that Iran has given to Hezbollah and Hamas are being put there in anticipation of retaliating against Israeli civilians if at some point Israel goes after Iran's nuclear weapons program.
We utilize our special forces in order to do special missions. The site that we attacked is deeply involved with the long-range rockets that have been showering Tel Aviv, showering north of Tel Aviv, showering Jerusalem. So we thought it was necessary to utilize special forces to carry out a special mission. Indeed, they made their mission. They were able to succeed in their mission. There was impact and a conflict with terrorists there on the site. We had few scratches and grazes, but nothing substantial.
On the Israeli side.
On the Israeli side, Palestinians, we had air support on site as well. The Palestinian terrorists, they paid a heavier price.
So was this an isolated incident, or will there be more Israeli, as they say, boots on the ground?
We can expect these type of activities taking place. The special ops that happen usually below the radar, in and out, swift missions, quickly, concise, and very precise at what they're doing to get that added value to safeguard Israeli lives.
So there will be more of these operations. What about tanks, armored personnel carriers, a formal invasion of Gaza, as has occurred in the past?
Well, we're preparing that possibility. It's not something we've wanted to do, but we've in the past 5 or 6 days, we have brought up the forces, and indeed there is a substantial force on the borders with Gaza, and if the order is given, we are prepared for that type of activity.
Thousands of Palestinians are fleeing the northern part of the Gaza Strip after Israel drops leaflets warning them to get out. It comes as Israel also takes its first ground action in Gaza, launching a brief commando attack. John Huddy is live in Gaza City with the details. John?
Jim, what we're seeing at this point is some serious action already. Numerous rockets were launched behind me to the north here, maybe about a mile. Some were intercepted by Israel's Iron Dome defense system. We've also heard heavy artillery fire off the coast, most likely from Israeli naval vessels targeting what appears to be that location. And by last night, that area was hit hard by those Israeli commandos, Israeli special forces, as we know now. There was an intense firefight targeting Hamas militant locations. It started with small arms fire, and it developed into intensified into heavy artillery, and then numerous air strikes. And at one point, we thought we were caught in the crossfires. There was a stream of tracers, some of which went over our heads at one point, and I'm just going to keep my eyes open. I'm hearing what sounds like a fighter coming in, and usually when you hear that sound, not too long after, you see and hear the airstrike. Now, as you mentioned, yesterday and also today, the Israeli military has been warning people in the northern part of Gaza here and also Gaza City to seek refuge, to seek shelter, because these airstrikes and also the ground campaign is likely to continue throughout the evening, now into the early morning hours of day 6 going into day 7. Okay, we just saw another rocket launch just northeast of our location here. This following several other rockets that were fired targeting Israel, and cannon fire that we continue to hear, a steady stream of cannon fire offshore. So bottom line, Jim, I think as now we're going into the evening here in Gaza, this is most likely what we've seen the last 6 days going to intensify. We'll keep you posted.
I just want your viewers to imagine the United States being bombarded not in one city or 2 cities, but in every city between New York and Colorado. Maybe 20% of the United States would be exempt from this. 80% of your citizens would have to be in bomb shelters or ready to go into bomb shelters within a minute to a minute and a half max.
Now, you've talked about how the public gets numbed to news from the Middle East. I mean, we've been listening to this for years. It's sometimes hard to tell what is new about today's report from last week, last month, last year. But clearly the point he is making is that if Americans had some empathy for the situation Israelis are in, they might feel differently about this.
Yeah, I think in general Americans do have empathy for the challenges that Israel faces, but I do believe, as you suggested, that most of our adult lives, we've been dealing with violence in Israel, external armies initially, then terrorism inside the country. But now the face of terrorism is really changing. And I think when you talk to the Israeli leaders, they know they're dealing with an almost intractable situation, Jim. And they're not only frustrated by it, I think they have a sense of hopelessness about it. You have Hezbollah to the north, terrorist organization to be sure, backed by Iran, that has sophisticated tens of thousands of rockets and missiles that they have used against the Israelis in the past. Hamas to the west, same capability, also backed by Iran. And the fact of the matter is, they can use these capabilities at will and change the entire quality of life experience inside Israel for as long as they want to do it. And that is what's frustrating the Israelis so much.
Because it has become more of a military operation than a terrorist operation.
Yeah, when I draw back from and look at the Middle East, I think you see a changing face of terrorism post 9/11. Certainly here, terrorist organizations behaving more like military organizations with advanced weaponry. ISIS in Syria and Iraq, a terrorist organization to be sure, but behaving like a military organization, actually an army that is on the move trying to conquer territory. This is new to the Middle East, and it's not going away.
Now, is there anything at all the U.S. can do about this?
Not much. I mean, the fact of the matter is, I think the Prime Minister is showing enormous restraint here in terms of what his objectives are as he spoke to Brit Hume this morning and saying he wants quiet. And what that means, he wants a ceasefire. He wants Hamas to stop firing his rockets. What he's not saying is, I intend to destroy the entire infrastructure of Hamas's weapon system, or I intend to destroy Hamas. He is not advocating that. He will do as much as he can to force Hamas to change its behavior. That's what he is going to do.
Any chance of a ceasefire? Just a few seconds left.
Well, eight days in 2012, over a month because of ground invasion in 2008. I think this is going to go on for days longer. and we'll see a rise in Palestinian casualties, and also those rockets are going to continue on Israel.
General Jack Keane, thank you very much, sir.